Good to see you. This decor, these lights, this red, this tree, thank you, Rachel, for your creativity. It exudes Christmas and love. There's a lot of love that goes into that. And you just feel it when you walk in here. If you didn't feel it before, you feel it now, right? It's beautiful. I want to share, it's going to be a personal story day, one that I haven't shared in about a decade. But I want to begin first with kind of taking off into this season of Christmas. And it really is about more Christ. Christ must. More Christ in the world, more Christ in me, more Christ in you. And it's not something that's just at Christmas time, it's something that we can birth within ourselves at all times. We talk about that beautiful scene that Reverend Barbara talked about. That's Luke's account, the metaphors in that, the beautiful story, the stars, the manger, the wise men, the journey. We've seen the plays with children that do it in such beautiful ways. Yet in unity we go into the story and we see, where am I in that story today? Where's my journey at this moment? Where's my journey this year? I love Christmas season for many reasons that most people do, but I especially love it because I like to look at my own story and see, where am I today? What am I birthing within me right now? Is it different than last year? Is it the same? Who am I today? Who am I becoming? I love these particular times of the year because we can move into that story of who I am and who I'm becoming, but into the release and the let go into the new year. I love that season for that purpose. I also do it around my birthday too. I like to see where I'm at. So there's certain seasons. Anybody else do that at certain seasons? You take a look at where you are and where you've been and where you've traveled. The birth story at Christmas invites us to go a little bit deeper, to see who we are, who we're becoming, what we're birthing. And again, I want to just speak to the Luke's account of the birth story in the Gospels. It is so vivid. If you haven't gone back to look or review it, take a look at that and take a look at all the different elements that are there. Beautiful, beautiful stories. Here, this babe is born into the world in the most unsuitable circumstances. Just imagine that. Yet sometimes don't we find ourselves in unsuitable circumstances? Loved ones, people that we know. We look at the world sometimes and we see people and we go, oh my gosh. And we feel so deeply, yet there was a lot placed on this babe that would be born to be the change in the world. Yet we don't put that on one person. We look within ourselves and say, what am I becoming to be a change in the world? In the metaphysical version of the world and change in the world, it's really about the reality of an external story. Yet what do we look at within ourselves to see what's moving beyond that? What's the Christ mas, the Christ, more Christ that's moving beyond to my higher self, my Christ self, that's saying something different about this story. Any one of us can stream anything at any moment now. I used to say we could look at the news, but we can stream whatever we want to. And we can look at that external story and we go, oh my gosh, unsuitable circumstances. But what do we do with that? What can I do in that moment? I can birth something new and I can have a new approach of how I walk the path. We all have that story. Jesus came to be a leader. And what I especially like about him, I've always had a kind of a kindred spirit with him. He broke down barriers. He challenged things. Even his own faith tradition said, I don't know so much about that. You might want to hold on there. And he would often put his reputation on the line because he knew something else. It's the Christ that he knew in those stories. More Christ in us. He broke down barriers, cultural, social, economic barriers. He changed systems that forever we're still working to change some systems today. In Colossians 1:27, I would say one of my favorites. It's actually on the stained glass window that's over there that shows the cross, if anyone ever wants to notice that one. Christ in you, the hope of glory. Charles Fillmore, co-founder of Unity, his favorite scripture verse also. It's inscribed in the arch above the Silent Unity Peace Chapel at Unity Village. Christ in you, the hope of glory. So that's not speaking to a Christ out there. That's reminding each one of us the Christ in me can rise up and become something new, even in unsuitable circumstances. Another Charles that is talked about often this time of years would be Charles Dickens. You ever heard that name? You might not have heard Charles Fillmore in some circles, but everyone's heard Charles Dickens. So think of the Scrooges experience, right? All the versions that you've seen by now, the ones that can be dark and ominous, the original plays, but those hilarious ones that have come up in recent years. But basically, it's a past, present, and future tense of someone looking at their story, visiting that past, who they have become, and who are they becoming. And I love that journey. And I trust a piece of my own story, a piece of my own past, will create a moment of change, an awareness, something in you, something you can touch into also. And I think it's important that you all know something true for me today. This is Sunday True Confessional. Oh, I noticed all eyes just suddenly went like that. What's he about to say? That's interesting. I believe in Santa Claus. I think you need to know that. And you're like, okay, yeah. No. I do. There is a magical story around Santa. Many of you have stories. And I'm not talking about the one where you might have got a picture taken on Santa where you're squawking and going, oh my gosh, who is this? I'm talking about a little deeper dive. Santa Claus comes from the Catholic tradition, the Christian dedication to the Saint Nicholas, who was named the Bishop of Myra, because he inherited a great deal of money, and to his tradition and his Christian tradition, he gave money and gave and supported the underfed and the less fortunate than him. And after his life transition, the Catholic Church decided to saint him. Became Saint Nicholas. It's all about giving. That's where we get the giving aspect from. And now we've evolved it into Santa and all the other things. The red accoutrements, the gold and the glitz is all from the bishop's robes. So it was a big deal in my household. Growing up was huge. I want to show you a little picture in context here. So this is my brother and I. You can figure out which one's which, can't you? So we were born 10 years apart, 2 days apart on our birthdays, 10 years apart. My mother had 3 children, my sister, my brother, and myself. My sister 13 years older, my brother 10 years older, and then there was this huge gap. A family in turmoil, a family with a lot of heavy stories. Yet my mother used to often describe that when I was born, there was this big gap and there was this great light and this shift in the family. That everyone's focus became on this new light and this giddy little child that was born. My brother and sister being older, it wasn't a sibling rivalry, it was an awe and a wonder of the new baby. My sister was even a built-in babysitter for years, if you can imagine that age difference. My brother, you should also know in context, was born with mild cerebral palsy and special needs. They had a lot of labels at those times for him that wasn't used as special needs, and you can imagine what those were. It was a rough time for the world and the way they would see people like him. But what I want to say is our family never saw him any different than anyone else. And he grew and developed because of that. So his learning challenges and his disabilities, they would call it at the time, were a great advantage to a little boy growing up. Because you see, when I was 2, 3, and 4, and he's 12, 13, and 14, we were learning and growing together about the same things. Learning to tie our shoes together, learning to color inside the lines, learning to cut out pictures and paste cards. So my mother, because schools were not equipped necessarily for special needs children, they would recommend institutionalization most of the time. She was determined that her son would not be in that system, and she was determined that he would learn and grow. And what a wonderful place to be as a child, to have this best friend, this best buddy, and we're raised the same, bunk beds and all, stories and all, and we're learning together. Stark difference though, he's huge. I'm really little. You can see the difference there. But you know what you get out of that? You get a best friend that can reach for the things that you're not supposed to. You can go romping in the woods and going on hiking adventures, and you know what? When your little legs get tired, hop on, and you've got your own horse riding down the trails. The adventures and the wonder that we would have were really, really important to my formative years and to our families because it shifted the dynamics completely. And I can remember going in stores and places, and I remember people would look because he was very different. And he would always look back and go, what are they looking at? And I'm like, I don't know. We never got it. My point to this is he never believed in diagnosis. Learning about unity of affirmations long before I knew about unity because he didn't believe in that. What he believed in was the joy, the love, the laughter of celebrations, especially Christmas. And the mind and the eyes of a child, it's really important when Christmas comes. We wrote our Christmas letters faithfully. They became booklets. We cut out pictures and pasted things that we would want. The Sears catalog was a great resource. Anyone ever did that? Yeah. And those letters were fantastic. They got longer and bigger. Decorating for Christmas became such a really big deal that we would start early. Sometimes we were giddy to start in September. My mom was a little exhausted, but she would say, okay, but you go at it. And it got bigger and bigger and bigger every year. So it was a magical wonderland. My father was so creative looking back at this that he said, you know, it's the fall season. And the leaves that fall are the same as hay that reindeer eat. It's no different. So my brother and I had the idea. Rake the leaves, create the piles for nutrition when they stopped by Christmas Eve, right? Have you ever heard that before? Okay, see, first time. So we got so creative that we would rake the leaves, and we had a long, narrow backyard. And my brother's idea was, let's create a landing pattern with a V, 8, 9 areas, so the reindeer could land easily because we didn't want any accidents with Santa on the roof. Now, you think this is one Christmas story. This is a lifetime of every year story. We never outgrew it because my brother stayed in that state, so therefore our family stayed in that state of the magic of Christmas. So we would rake the leaves, and wind would come, sometimes rain, and mess it all up. No big deal. We would just put them back together to keep them in the order. Now, sometimes we would get creative and we would put shaved carrots into the leaves, a little extra nutrition there. But we also had to have the 9 buckets of water. You can't just eat without water, right? You're all thinking, seriously? Yes. This is a big deal. So the water buckets and the lane was created. Now, yeah, Santa had cookies and milk, and every house did that, but we wanted to be a resting place because he might spend a little more time. Now, it was also important that we paid attention to the naughty and nice list. You know, that's a big deal for kids, right? So after August birthdays, we had just a little window of naughty time because then we had to start being really, really good again, right? So my mom had a pretty good household until about January 5th or 6th or something. Then we could kind of go wild again for a few months. So it was especially important that we raked the leaves, we got things together, and I can remember as time went on, going to bed early. You remember that one? That was really important. We went to bed early. We were very faithful in it. And I can remember, now I'm getting to be high school, 16, 17, 18. It's not as important to me, is it? And he's looking at me, seeing me change like the adults. We're sitting at the table one particular, I'm going to say I was probably going out with friends and stuff, and he was working on his letters. This was probably October, November. And I was in and out, busy with high school, busy with things, proms, dances, band. He was homeschooled. And I can remember him sitting at the table frustrated. My brother was optimistic and joyful always, never down, never depressed. And I sat by and said, what's going on? And he said, well, I'm worried. And I said, what? He said, well, you don't work on your letters like you used to. And I looked at his face and I literally saw sadness, like he was witnessing his best friend changing. And in that moment, I learned a lesson, that it's through the lens of a child that our faith is reborn every moment. And I sat down, and nothing was more important than working on that letter. I never stopped working on those letters. And I want to say the correspondence all year long between the North Pole and my brother was pretty creative. How's Mrs. Claus? How's the reindeer? How are the elves doing? Are you taking a nice vacation? Are you eating well? Are you going to be okay this season? My brother really got creative with the letters. And I just want to say the letters that came back in return were really long and lengthy and creative letters too. He really enjoyed those. At some point, I'm going to say it's probably there. At some point, it's probably around age 40. I'm 30. And he looked at me one day and he said, I've been wondering. And I thought, oh no, here we go. What are you wondering? Is Santa going to retire? And I said, I haven't really thought about that. I don't think that's a thing. And he said, well, I've noticed some people retire and people get older. I don't, but people do. And I said, well, that's true. Because you got to remember, with the spirit of a child, his joy and his enthusiasm, his giddiness and his whimsy was always apparent. It didn't matter the calendar age. And I said, I hadn't thought about that. Why do you ask that? Why is that coming up now? And he said, well, because I see you work on applications and resumes. Can't I? My brother never worked a job like we would typically know that. And I said, yeah, what kind of an application? What kind of a resume? He goes, Santa's job. So I made the face that I would typically make. I'm like, okay, well, let's work on it. He said, you write beautiful resumes. Can you help me? And so I remember saying yes and not knowing how far it would go. And the next day, he had a stack of blank applications he had gone to a nearby grocery store to get as a format. He changed what they were to and who it was. And he put North Pole, Santa, and he began creating his resume as a template. And so we did that together, and of course it went off in the mail to the North Pole. Years later, I didn't think about it, and he didn't mention it. And he spent his entire life absolutely believing, and I remember probably around age 42, I'm 32, so there's a 10-year gap. My sister and her kids, mom, were all at the house. We're laughing and cutting up Christmas Eve. You know how it can get really loud and fun and games and TV on, and my brother was pacing. You got to go to bed. Everyone's too loud. He's not going to come. You've got to go to bed. You've got to go to bed. He's not going to come. He was really concerned about this going to bed thing. And my sister said, oh, Ernie, go to bed. We'll quieten down. He's going to come anyway. And he looked over at my mom like, is she going to get away with that? And my mom said, okay, we'll turn the TV down a little bit, go to bed. Kids were still running around playing. And my brother looked at me and he said, are you going to make everybody go to bed? And I said, Ernie, we can stay up a little bit later. It's going to be okay. And he said, nope. And he marched in his Christmas pajamas out the back door. Any guesses where he went? You won't guess it. Troy knows. He went to the breaker box and killed the power to the house. He came back in the house and said, go to bed. Lights out. Well, my mom said, Ernie, we're going to have power. But we got the message. Power goes back on. We quieten down and everybody goes to bed as we're supposed to do because it's Christmas Eve. And the family still remembers. My nieces still laugh about that story because they were really little then and they remember how serious it was. And they've taken that tradition on into their families now today. Sometime a little bit later, Mom was becoming ill and she made her transition. My brother was in my care now. My sister was diagnosed and her prognosis was very short. It didn't last long and they had both made their transition. So our family had shrunk suddenly in a couple of years. My brother was never worried. He was never concerned. He was never depressed. He was never down. He was always joyful and saw the joy and the light in all things. And at age 46, I remember specifically, and this is why we can know Christmas at any time of the year, because Troy and I were on our way to a Sunday brunch. And my brother called, because at this point, he wasn't feeling well. That might be the North Pole. Because I was promised not to tell this story. He called and he wasn't feeling well. And it was an unusual thing because he always felt well. And so we went to the doctor, and the doctor came back and was sitting with me and my brother and explaining to us that his lab results came back that showed acute myeloid leukemia, AML. I'd never heard of it before. I didn't know it. My brother's sitting there with a big smile on his face going, just singing. And I'm kind of going down the tunnel. You know those tunnels you go when you're hearing something? And I'm thinking to myself, what is this? How can this be? And I'm hearing the timeline that we're in. And so I came back to it and I looked at my brother's face and I realized faith through the lens of a child, the belief system that he has, it has no effect on him to hear this because he is absolutely joyful going, so I don't feel really well right now, but that's temporary like a stomach ache or anything else. As time would go on, in the months to come, treatments would happen and patches of hair would come out, as some of you have experienced or know. And I was worried about what he would think about that. And one day he came up and he said, I think I want to shave my head. Again, I'm shocked. I'm going through my emotions. And I said, okay, you want to? He said, yes. So he did. And of course, what I saw was very different than I was used to seeing. And he looked in the mirror and the smile came on his face and he said, oh my gosh. I said, what? And he said, I look just like Curly. The Three Stooges were a favorite program that played quite a bit in our house. Never a fan of Shemp. You know the context. Curly was his guy. He goes, I look just like Curly. This is going to be good. And of course, he did some little skits around Curly. And we went off to more play and fun. It wasn't long after that he was in need of hospice care. And he was at our house, staying with Troy and I had hospice coming in and out of the house, and he was doing really well. His hair started coming back in, and as some people know, hair comes back in very differently sometimes. And it came in very, very white. And we were, I guess, genetically, we would all be very white-haired people, but it came in white, and he said, oh my gosh. I said, what? And he said, my hair is turning white. And I said, what are you thinking about that? And he goes, something magical's happening here. And I said, okay. And he said, have you ever heard anything from the North Pole? Now, this had been years. And I said, it's June. I haven't heard from the North Pole. I'm not remembering resume. And he said, did you ever hear anything? I said, I haven't heard anything yet. He said, okay. I didn't put it together what he was referring to. So a few months went by, and with work schedules and with diagnosis and what was going on, I had the need to place him in a center that was close to the house that was hospice care. The nurses and the caretakers there loved him because he went from room to room and he created joy with everyone. You would never see him and know that anything was wrong because he didn't believe that. And that's why I want to emphasize how we believe, what we give our power to, with our denials and our affirmations. We know there's something occurring, but do we give it power? Or do we give our power to the affirmative good in the story? And his was Christmas joy year-round. Everyone loved him. He was a joy to be there. He was a lifted up spirits. And I can remember one Sunday we were going to an after-church lunch. And he called and he said, are you coming by today? And I said, yeah, I'm going to go after lunch. He said, can you come now? And I thought that was the strangest phone call. I'll never forget it. And I said, yeah, we canceled. I went there, and it was just he and I in the room. And when I walked in, he looked very different. I'd never seen him look this way. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, I feel woozy. I feel unsteady. I can't get out of the bed because I might fall. I'm very dizzy. So I said, let me ask the nurses. And I went out and I asked, and they said, just in the last 24 hours, he's going through the releasing experience. He's going through letting go. And I said, how do you go from up and joyful to that overnight? I didn't understand it. And they explained a little bit more. And so I pulled it together, and I went and sat by the bed, and I said, so tell me how you're feeling. And he said, I'm really concerned. And I said, why? Of course, you know what I'm thinking because of how he feels. And he said that you haven't heard from the North Pole. And in that moment, true confessions, I said, actually, a letter came in the mail yesterday. From, I said, the North Pole. And here we go back to our brother stuff. He said, and it said, and I said, and it said that the job is yours if you choose to take it. Santa's ready. And he sat up in the bed. The life and the light and the sparkle and those green eyes came back like I've never seen it before. And he said, oh my gosh, I'm going to be Santa. And I said, it is exactly what you said. He said, I've waited so long. If you can only imagine the amount of tears running down my face in those moments. And my brother reached out and touched my hand. And he said, why are you crying? Are you worried people will find out that your brother is Santa? And I said, yeah, that's what it is. He said, don't tell them. Because I'm going to deal with the magic. And I'm going to be at the North Pole. And I'll write you letters. And I'm going to come and see you. And now he's caring for me as if I'm going to see my brother go off to the North Pole to take on this big job. And I looked at him again, and once again, he's teaching me faith. He's teaching me the belief system of a child that shows up with the Christmas spirit. As that day would go by, he would say, I'm kind of getting worried again. And I'd say, worried about what this time? He said, well, you know in the back seat how it was always motion sickness? And I said, yeah. He said, you remember when we flew on planes? I said, yeah. And he said, the motion sickness? And I said, Ernie, what is this about? And he said, well, I don't want to be on the sleigh and get woozy and vomit on the presents. And I said, okay, Ernie, do you remember Dramamine? Absolutely. I said, you take Dramamine and it's done. And he said, and Christmas magic. I said, yes, Christmas magic. So do you see again who the teacher is? The teacher on and on and on. As he would make his transition that afternoon, and I watched the transformation, I knew right then and there that my brother became Santa. The magic and the joy that I could share from this day forward to other people, and as I said, I haven't shared it in a number of years. But it's a shift story for all of us when we really see the magic of what life is here and it's about. There's a movement to something new. There's a transition that happens within us when we believe in the rebirthing story within us. The Christmas magic that's within us, and whether it's a June day or an April or a May, it doesn't have to be December. It's the Christ in us, the more Christ that we are giving birth to. This was a few moments prior to, and I didn't realize in this slide, but you can see where we're at. And this was going to be a number called Chattanooga Choo Choo that we often did. We jitterbug to rocking around the Christmas tree quite a bit. And that's what this symbol is the Chattanooga Choo Choo. You remember that? We did all the albums and all the old songs, and this was one of the images just before everything changed that day. But you see joy, you see love, you see a lot of sunshine there. We all have, I believe, a curriculum in our lives that we can use our stories to evolve and inform us. And I think the Christmas season brings that up for us. We can look at the manger scene, the unsuitable circumstances. You would think if you didn't know the story that my brother was born into unsuitable circumstances, that people would have poor thing, pity. No, not at all. The greatest teacher, the greatest lesson, the greatest giver of life was who he was. And that's with me today that continues in our lives and is a part of yours now too. As I was doing his aftercare, the service is over, I was working on the monument that would be next to my sister and my mother. And at the top of the monument, I knew what I wanted to be there. And so I had an artist etch the moon and the night sky and the twinkling stars and the sleigh and the reindeer going across the top of the stone. And in that moment, the artist that was going to work on this etching talked to me about they'd never done that before, but they knew the scene very well. You see the scene in your head, don't you? It's beautiful. It's magical. And so the scripture that I was going to use at the bottom changed on me really quickly because I decided not to use a scripture. I looked back at Clement Clark Moore's famous poem from 1823, A Visit from St. Nicholas. You may know it as 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. So at the bottom of his stone, I had written, Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night. Because to me it meant so many different stories there. And I think it's important for us to realize that I remember that. I remember all those Christmases. That was First Bite Christmases. Myrtle Fillmore wrote, in the early 1900s, we can learn the most important lesson from the faith of the child who hangs his stockings by the fireplace for Santa Claus to fill it with the gifts he has been asked to place in it. Instead of trying to lessen the faith of the child in the unseen helper, that's the key line there. It would be vastly beneficial to us if we learn from him how to ask, stretch forth the empty hand, and find it filled. Back to the St. Nicholas, the giving aspect, Myrtle Fillmore talking about don't lessen the faith of a child, lift it up within us also. And it is about the giving, the story, the love, the beauty that's there for us all the time. I believe, as you can tell, and I can't be challenged on it. I was there in the experience. Santa's an idea of a story, of the beauty, of the love and the lights that we often move through our journey. We get busy, we do less. It may not be about the sparkles in the trees as much, but it's about the magic, the miracles that occur within us. Would you agree? And we need to remember that more and more and more. I believe in the magic of Christmas and all that goes with us, and I trust this story has shifted something for you today, or at least created a memory for you too. And if you've never heard this from me before, you'll hear it today, that you matter. You matter right now, right here on this planet where you are. And that I believe in you. I believe in this community. I believe in unity as a value. I believe in unity as an organization in this world. I believe you are sacred. Each one of us have a sacred story. And hands over your hearts. You are loved. You are loved. Merry Christmas. And thank you for giving me the gift of being here to share this story.